Hey everyone, quick question. When was the last time you lost power for more than just a few hours? If you're like most people, you say, hey, no big deal, I'll wait for the power to come back on. But what if I told you that while the average American loses about 8 hours of power a year, some outages end up lasting weeks or even months? Welcome back to another Mag Gear video. Today we're going to be diving deep into power outages. We'll discuss why they happen, what goes wrong when they do, as well as some materials and supplies that you might want to have with you to help make them more survivable and comfortable. Let's start with the obvious question. Why do we lose power in the first place? Not all of the causes are weather related, so you might be surprised when you hear some of the things that actually do cause power outages. The biggest cause of power outages are severe weather situations, such as thunderstorms, which might bring high wind and bring down power lines or bring down tree branches on top of power lines. You can think of snowstorms, which might bring a lot of weight on top of cables and snap them, or maybe even hurricanes, which could wipe out an entire grid altogether, or just overuse in summer heat or severe cold when everybody might have their AC or heating on, overcook the system, and have the grid go down because of it. That being said, it's not just these major storms that causes power outages. It could be as simple as a simple tree branch falling on the right power line and that power line going down, causing thousands of homes to lose power. The second major cause of power outages in America is actually aging infrastructure. People might not realize this, but the average piece of equipment inside these power grids is actually 40 years old. And all it takes is one piece of equipment's failure to cascade into others that could eventually cause regional power outages. Then there's the human factor. You have construction crews that might accidentally hit underground cables. You have cars that might run into power poles, and you even have squirrels. And yeah, that might sound silly, but squirrels actually do cause 10% of all power failures in the US. And they do so when they get into transformers and destroy the equipment in there. Squirrels actually cause more damage to power systems in the US than cyber attacks do. And speaking of cyber attacks, this is unfortunately becoming more common of a threat, with different governments and criminal organizations targeting power grids. Luckily, successful cyber attacks are extremely rare, but when they do happen, they could have major effects. And finally, you sometimes just have simple overdemand. In moments of extreme weather, you have a lot of people using their electricity at the same time, which overstresses the grid and requires the power companies to make rolling blackouts in order to protect the entire grid from going down. Now I'm going to give you two real-world examples about how dangerous long-term power outages can be and how it affects so many people on an annual basis. In February 2021, Texas unfortunately experienced a severe winter storm that caused 4 million people to lose power. And they didn't just lose power for a few hours. Many of these people lost power for weeks in freezing temperatures. And I actually had a number of family members who were affected by this personally. The official death toll from the storm was over 200 people. And these deaths, unfortunately, were due to hypothermia, carbon monoxide poisoning caused by improper heating, as well as medical emergencies where these people were not able to get the resources they needed. What made the situation worse was that it wasn't just electricity. The power outage caused the water treatment plants to go down, leaving millions of people without clean water. Gas pumps couldn't actually pump the fuel, and grocery stores had to shut down because the food was beginning to spoil. And lastly, cell towers actually experienced outages as well, so people who had emergencies weren't able to make calls. The second unfortunate example of a prolonged power outage was in 2017 when Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico. Unfortunately, the storm wiped out the entire power grid, and many people were left without power for months, and some people even up to 11 months or almost a year after the storm initially hit. The official death toll for the storm was north of 3,000 people, with many of these people unfortunately passing because they didn't have proper access to medical equipment or emergency services due to the power outage. And I want to emphasize that these two examples were both within the United States, where people normally assume that we have modern infrastructure. And in both cases, people, for the most part, were not prepared for prolonged outages and figured that the power would be restored within a relatively short period of time. So what actually goes wrong when the power goes out? I'm going to walk you through a cascade of problems that most people don't even really think about until they're actually living the situation themselves. First, you'll lose lighting, and that's pretty obvious. But you'll also lose cooling and heating, which may be really important depending on the time of the year and where you live. Additionally, your freezer and refrigeration will run out of electricity, meaning that once the temperature stabilizes, a lot of the food will begin to spoil. And lastly, for a lot of modern homes, the water is actually pumped, and a lot of the times these pumps won't actually work without electricity. There's also a communication breakdown. Your internet services will most likely go down immediately when your electricity goes down. You'll obviously have your phone with whatever backup battery that you have. However, there's a chance that the cell service may be spotty or off completely depending on how wide of a region your power outage is encompassing. Landlines can last longer, but obviously nowadays many people don't have landlines in their homes. You'll likely also run into some transportation issues, especially if the power outage is over a large encompassing area. After backup generators go down, a lot of gas stations might not be able to pump more gas, and traffic lights might not be able to still operate, which could make driving dangerous. And one last thing that I never thought about for a long time is electrical garage openers simply won't work. So you'll have to know how to manually override your garage to open it so that you aren't trapped inside without a car. Now that we talked about some of the causes and issues with prolonged power outages, let's talk about what you could use and what you may need to help you survive and be comfortable during these unfortunate power outages should they arise. I'm going to break this down into categories, starting with the bare essentials. The first priority is lighting. It is not just one type of lighting solution. The best is to have multiple different lighting types for your needs. And I know what you might be thinking. Hey, I have my phone. Why not just turn my flashlight on and that'll do the trick? And while you're not wrong, your flashlight will work. Unfortunately, this will drain your phone's battery and leave it unavailable in case of other emergency situations. Now, the best solution is usually to have multiple different lighting sources, starting with flashlights for every member of the household. And it's best to have LED flashlights because they last longer. It's also beneficial to potentially have some kind of lantern, electrically powered lantern specifically, that can light up a bigger part of the room or whatever area you're in. And lastly, a pro tip is to wear headlamps because this way you can keep your hands free while you're doing more important tasks such as cooking, working on building something to make your lives easier, or even just enjoying your day-to-day life with a power outage. The next priority would be a portable power source. And I'm not talking about those little chargers that you can use to recharge your phone. I'm talking about a more powerful power bank that could be used to recharge multiple devices multiple times. And if you can afford it, having a solar-backed power bank is beneficial because you can recharge it with the solar panels and it can make it last even longer. For serious backup power, you have a few options. One really common one now is obviously solar power, panels, and batteries within your home or your garage. And these are beneficial because obviously they charge, they store, and they have a lot of power that could be used in backup if the grid goes down. Small gas generators are a cheaper alternative to the solar batteries. However, they do have downside, they need to be maintained and they also use fuel. So they have to have access to fuel for them to work. And just a quick warning, please do not use these gas generators within an enclosed space or within your home, as it could lead to carbon monoxide poisoning, which will harm you a lot more than a power outage will. And for those with solar panels, just a quick note, a lot of people don't know that when your system is tied to the grid, usually it'll be shut down in times of major weather issues or power outages for safety reasons. So if you want to have more solar power coming in, you'll need to have your own backup system, or you'll need to have some sort of inverter that'll help connect it to your battery itself. Now, it's also essential to make sure you keep your communication devices charged. For most of us, that'll be our cell phones, but obviously if the cell towers are down and we can't communicate, or if your phone has already lost power, the alternative would be some sort of radio. A lot of national broadcasts and local broadcasts will do different weather updates in both AM or FM. So make sure you know what those are ahead of time. And if you like other alternative communication sources, check out some of the videos that Sam has done on Meshtastic and other ways of communicating during emergencies. Water or food storage are incredibly important during power outages, especially if they're prolonged and you don't have access to outside resources. Now, for water, it's usually recommended that you keep about a gallon of water for consumption per person per day. Obviously, you might need more for hygienic or cooking purposes. And normally, people will store this water in water bottles. However, if you have a backup water tank, you can also use that. It's important to know, though, that if you do have a backup water tank, it's usually recommended to regularly rotate the water in and out to make sure that the water itself stays clean and you don't get sick from it. For food storage, it's normally recommended that you focus on items that are non-perishable and are normally easy to make without having to have access to electricity. These items can be, canned goods, could be dried fruit, nuts, peanut butter, so on and so forth. It's also important to note that it's probably a good idea to have a manual can opener. And while it may sound silly, a lot of the can openers now are electric. So just a quick note, please make sure to have a manual can opener if you do have canned foods. We touched on heating and cooling before. And obviously, it's super important to make sure you know where you are and during these different prolonged power outages, as it could be really important depending on the environment you're in. As a reminder, again, please do not bring outside heating equipment such as grills inside your place because that might lead to carbon monoxide poisoning. Usually, for heating, the best sources are sleeping bags, extra blankets, extra layers of clothes, and items like that. For cooling, it's usually best preferred to have some kind of electrically powered fan that you can hook up to your power bank, cooling towels, and other cooling items like that as well. Another super important idea is to make sure you have a stockpile of medicines in case of these prolonged power outages and not having access to go to the pharmacy, pick up whatever medicines you need. Now let's talk about some of the items that separate those of us who survive from those of us who actually stay comfortable during these prolonged power outages. To start off, I'll give you some quick power tips. For those of you who are solar panel owners, a DIY tip for those of you who own solar panels is if you set up your own sub panel only for essential items that need powering, such as refrigeration, electricity, so on and so forth, you'll make sure that your battery life actually lasts longer throughout these prolonged power outages. For those of you who are using generators, never run them at full capacity. Normally, running around 75 capacity can make sure they're running efficiently and also last longer for your uses during these prolonged power outages. You'll need ways to cook food that don't require electricity. Stuff such as a camping stove with fuel canisters could be much more beneficial than an outdoor grill. Again, please be careful with any kind of carbon monoxide issues. And I know I mentioned this before and it sounds a little silly, but make sure to have a manual can opener. Don't just stock up on prescription medicine. Also make sure you have other over-the-counter medicines that you might need during these extended power outages, such as pain relievers, first aid kits, thermometers, so on and so forth. Also, make sure you pick up whatever hygienic items you need, toothbrush, toothpaste, soap, so on and so forth, because with these power outages hit, you might not have access to these outside resources. You might not have normally thought about this during extended power outages, but keeping spirits up is actually really important for a family's mental health during these longer power outages. To help keep spirits up, it's usually recommended to have some sort of board games to help pass the time together, as well as other books, coloring materials for children, and other items that are normally pretty small and don't take up much space, but could really help families cope with these extended power outages. And of course, a super important call out is that if anyone in your family needs access to important medical equipment that is power dependent, make sure to have backup power sources. And if you don't know where to get them, please reach out to your medical professionals or other professionals in your region to find out how to get access to backup power or backup solutions in case of prolonged power outages. Now, having all this stuff is great, but it's not actually beneficial if you can't find it or use it during these times of prolonged power outages. So I'm going to talk about some storage and maintenance tips that might help you. One major organizational tip is to keep all these items in the same area and make sure that everyone in your family knows where that is so they can access it in times of emergencies. It's also extremely helpful to label all the items that you have and keep an inventory list ahead of time. Battery management is an area where a lot of people actually fail. It's usually recommended to switch and check batteries every 6 months, and also important to make sure you store batteries in dry, cool places and not to buy cheap batteries because these cheaper batteries could leak and cause damage to your equipment. The rotation system is extremely important for food and water storage. Make sure you rotate the water routinely. And for food, please label and make sure you're checking the expiry date so that you don't end up eating expired food. It's extremely important to test your equipment, so please make sure you're testing your flashlights, your radios, your battery-powered equipment every few months just to make sure they're still working. I know we mentioned this many times, but please make sure everyone in your family knows how to use all the items and where they're located, and do regular testing and training on these items if needed. So here's the unfortunate reality. While still rare, these extended power outages are becoming more frequent, especially with more powerful storms and aging infrastructure that's used to maintain our power grids. But here's the good news. With proper preparation, these power outages go from being dangerous emergencies to a more manageable situation. The key is to make sure you have the supplies you need, that you get them maintained, and that you know how to use them when the emergency arises. And if all of this feels overwhelming, it's better to start small than to not start at all. So pick up maybe a flashlight, a radio that's battery powered, and build your kit over time rather than buying everything at once. Remember that the best emergency kit is one that you actually have when you need it, and not the perfect one that you're planning on buying down the road. So here's my challenge for you. Pick a few of the items that you heard about today and try to get them this week if possible. And leave a comment below saying what you bought why you bought it, and what you plan on doing with it. And if you have lived through some of these prolonged power outages, please also comment and let us know what worked, what didn't work, and what you wish you had during this time. If this video made you think more about power outage preparedness, please hit the like and subscribe button for more practical preparedness content.